This presentation is in dialogue with another video paper I presented earlier this year at the British Shakespeare Association conference in a panel focusing on the De-Centred Shakespeares Network and its 2022 initiative, Pericles on the Seas.
That project connected artists, academics, and students in India, Ghana, Brazil, and Scotland through low-tech digital recordings, generating site-specific filmic performance artifacts telling versions of the story of Pericles. The work of Brave Spaces India in Mumbai and Act for Change in Jamestown, Ghana, in particular, emphasized their coastal setting, in fishing communities, on the dockside, and in the littoral zone, where water meets land. This offered a powerful and generative perspective, invoking shared colonial histories across oceans, connecting sites in the global south, but also asking searching questions about sustainability for coastal communities in the 21st century. I reflected on this as a creative spur for South African Shakespeareans. Despite an abundance of material from the past 5 years in the format of the self-recorded monologue, and a handful of short film projects likewise linked to monologues, such as Jam at the Windy Brow and Speak Me a Speech, Shakespearean practice in South Africa has rarely extended to the kind of situated, collective performance seen in the Pericles on the Seas model. Taking their cue from colleagues in the De-Centred Shakespeares Network, I suggested, South African scholars and practitioners might explore the potential of historically significant maritime or littoral sites to craft new forms of political ecological activism. To this end, I turned my attention from Pericles to another of Shakespeare's watery late plays, The Tempest, which has a complex South African reception history. The country's theatre makers, whether they've focused on or in some cases tried to ignore the play's colonizer-colonized thematics, have tended not to pay close attention to its island and maritime setting, overlooking the fusion of history and geography in imagined or actual seascapes. Here I do not mean the stage presence of rigging ropes and fishing nets as gestures towards the ocean, or even choreography, puppetry, lighting and sound effects to recreate a storm at sea. These have been plentiful, but rather a fully oceanic or littoral dramaturgical concept. As Marguerite de Waal notes, despite interesting experiments with The Tempest in South Africa over the past 3 decades, productions bound by the Shakespearean text have proved, quote, inadequate for articulating complex and variable post-apartheid experiences. This leaves Shakespeare scholars to muse in an optative mood about what prospective South African tempests might look or sound like, how our approach to the play might have to change. And in this respect, I'm following the example of Sandra Young, whose work enables us to think about how South African artists could explore the underwater archive of our own histories of slavery and colonialism in the way that others have done with the Atlantic Middle Passage.
Environmental concerns in South Africa have typically been linked to the land issue, the long history of displacement and dispossession of black people, first during the colonial period and later under apartheid, with limited restitution in the post-apartheid era. This has often focused on rural-urban divisions and on racialized distinctions between commercial and subsistence farming. With over 3,000 kilometers of coastline, however, South Africa is also particularly exposed to the oceanic consequences of climate change.
The country's history has been shaped by sea crossings and maritime encounters. While many disciplines and subfields within the oceanic humanities have made productive use of this scholarly framework to address both the shared colonial histories and present-future catastrophes facing countries across the global south, it has remained largely underutilized in terms of South African Shakespeares. Young's work is the exception here, especially her 2019 book, Shakespeare in the Global South, Stories of Oceans Crossed in Contemporary Adaptation.
But was it fair to ask, as I did at the BSA, why have there been no blue South African Shakespeares? Well, it isn't quite accurate to say that South African theatre practitioners have not applied an oceanic imagination in their approach to Shakespeare's plays. There have been a handful of literal and maritime elements in post-apartheid stagings, perhaps most notably in productions of Hamlet, citing the apocryphal Red Dragon performances in order to draw on a supposed centuries-long history of Shakespeare's presence in Africa, or at least just offshore.
There has been much dispute as to whether these putative renditions of Hamlet and Richard II on the deck of merchant ship the Red Dragon actually took place, as it lay at anchor off Africa's west and east coasts in 1607 and 8. They were in all likelihood 19th century fabrications. Either way, it is significant that the supposed location was not on African soil, but at sea, more specifically on board a ship in the service of the East India Company. The use and misuse of the red dragon is a kind of locus classicus for following Young's advice to apply to Shakespeare criticism Jean Casimir's question regarding the perspective of historians of colonialism. Are you on the boat or on the shore? Nevertheless, it proved generative when in 2007 the travelling company Shakespeare ZA, under the direction of Page Newmark, asked audiences to imagine a recreation of the so-called bad first quarto text of Hamlet on the deck of the Red Dragon. 10 years later, Fred Abramser directed a production that did something similar, pitching itself as a performance by the ship's crew, quote, off the east coast of South Africa. This framing device slowly disappeared, but the stage design included a square deck surrounded by a shallow moat. Various characters waded on or off stage through the water, or dangled their feet in it during moments of rest, or had their faces shoved into it as a form of torture. This underscored the watery imagery in Hamlet. While one should be cautious of the ideological implications of a fabricated history making a simplistic connection between Shakespeare and South Africa, these maritime Hamlets show what could be done with The Tempest if productions of the latter play were staged with an eco-oceanographic dramaturgical approach that attended to histories of the global South and local political nuance. There is a performing arts precedent, albeit one that is musical and poetic rather than dramatic. The Storming, an operetta by the Insurrections Ensemble, first performed in 2015. This ensemble seeks to, quote, create music that finds a home in both Africa and India, combining song and the spoken word in various languages from either side of the Indian Ocean. The Storming borrowed from both The Tempest and Aimé Césaire's Une Tempête, or, as the participants recount, quote, we didn't feel beholden to the text, we broke it. At any rate, the poetry was secondary to the music. Dilip Menon's review of a performance in 2017 captures the Storming's historical depth and geographical breadth. The idea of a storm condenses the anxieties of past sorrow, present distress, and future devastation. To call a production The Storming locates a predicament in the present continuous, as ongoing, as not yet resolved. It also suggests agency and a utopian instant from within a maelstrom, the storming of a bastion which needs to fall. In our present conjuncture, the world seems to be in the midst of resolving all senses of the word. While South African productions of The Tempest have fallen in line with the play's concluding emphasis on reconciliation, offering forgiveness for the former colonizer and freedom for the formerly colonized, The Storming does not grant such easy resolution. Menon points to the fourth and final movement of the oratorio, which features the song of the mole rats. The end brings, quote, not redemption and a waking from history, but merely a sail that sets the pulse of a populace racing, participation in the rampant consumerism of global late capitalism, suggesting a trajectory that is more in line with the bitter vision expressed by the character of Prosperous in the second movement. In this case, not because of post-colonial violence, but because of ecosystemic collapse, carcasses rotting in the harbours, oil snaking its way across the waves, blood in all the rivers. My final example features another rodent, not Freedom Haide Caliban, the mole rat, serving a new consumerist master, but Prospero as, quote, a rat, a king rat, a ruler of rats, in Bettina Malcolmes's visual radio play, A Tempest for the Sea Under the City. This experimental production was performed at the Centre for the Less Good Idea in Johannesburg in 2024, and it is indeed set in Joburg, Jozi, Egoli, the City of Gold, South Africa's notoriously ill-planned, landlocked mining town turned megalopolis. Hundreds of kilometers from the coastline, an enormous underground sea below the city has been created by years of stormwater washing down the abandoned mine shafts and tunnels deep below the surface. Here Prospero the Rat King rules on, quote, an island of broken concrete and iron and uranium-lined mining tailings and shiny appliances washed into these depths by years of conjured and natural storms. An artificial island that gleams and shimmers like all the debris of the electronic age and its mechanical gods. This premise is not entirely fantastical to Johannesburgers, familiar with the powerful force of Highveld thunderstorms, with nefarious criminal underworlds, with the notion that the earth beneath their feet is honeycombed from mining, with crumbling urban infrastructure, with the relentless drive of commerce and consumerism. Watery, situated tempests can be set in or under inner-city Joburg, an Afropolitan hub of trade and migration that has been described by Tanya Zak as, quote, an entrepot which bears a close resemblance to major port cities.
In The Storming and A Tempest for the Sea Under the City, we have moved, as de Waal indicates South African tempests surely must, beyond the Shakespearean text. Yet these two examples signal future possibilities at sea or on land for oceanic South African Shakespeares in an age of environmental crisis.